On January 5th, 2024, at 16,000 feet above Oregon, a door fell off a brand new airplane. Not a door that was old, not a door that was worn. A door on a plane that was 3 months out of the factory. The passengers next to that hole, they were still buckled in. No one died, by a miracle. But here's what should terrify you more than the door. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't a design flaw. It wasn't the weather. It was 4 missing bolts. 4 bolts! On a plane built by the most famous aerospace company in human history. This is the story of Boeing, and I promise you, the missing bolts are the least disturbing part. You've probably heard about the Boeing crashes. You've probably seen the news clips, the congressional hearings, the headlines. And you probably think you know the story. A company cut corners. People died. It was a tragedy. But here's what you don't know. This story doesn't start with a crash. It starts in a boardroom. In 1997, with a handshake. What happened in that room triggered a chain reaction that would take 25 years to fully detonate. And it didn't just kill passengers. It killed the culture. It killed the engineers. It killed the institution. Boeing didn't fall because of bad luck. Boeing fell because it chose to. This is not a story about planes. This is a story about what happens when a company forgets what it is. To understand how far Boeing fell, you first have to understand what it was. Because Boeing wasn't just a company, it was an American institution. For most of the 20th century, Boeing was what Silicon Valley became in the 21st. If you were the best engineer in the country, you went to Boeing. Their headquarters in Seattle wasn't just an office. It was a cathedral of aerospace. Engineers walked the factory floors. Engineers ran the meetings. Engineers made the final calls. There was a phrase they used inside Boeing, almost a religion. If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And the world agreed. The 707 revolutionized transatlantic travel. The 747, the jumbo jet, turned flying from a luxury to something ordinary. The 777, the Dreamliner. Boeing didn't just build planes. Boeing defined what planes were. And here's what made Boeing genuinely different from every other manufacturer on Earth, their safety culture. In the old Boeing, any worker, any floor mechanic, any engineer could halt an entire production line if they spotted a safety concern. Not management, not executives, any worker. That one piece of culture was the entire reason Boeing planes were trusted by billions of people. The world put its life in Boeing's hands, and Boeing, for decades, was worthy of that trust. Then came 1997. 1997. Boeing acquires McDonnell Douglas, its struggling rival, for $13.3 billion. On paper, it looked like Boeing swallowed McDonnell Douglas. In reality, McDonnell Douglas swallowed Boeing, with Boeing's own money. The executives who came over from McDonnell Douglas didn't come as subordinates. They came as architects. One of them, Harry Stonecipher, would later become Boeing's CEO. And the philosophy he brought with him had a name inside McDonnell Douglas. They called it hunter-killer. What does hunter-killer mean in a corporation? It means your job is not to build the best product. Your job is to hit the financial target, by any means, every quarter. The insiders who lived through this period described the culture collision in one line. It was like hunter-killer assassins meeting Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts lost. Watch what happened next. It reads like a slow-motion takeover. First, Boeing moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. Think about that. The company that builds planes moved its leadership away from the factories. Why Chicago? Tax benefits. The people making decisions about jet safety would now do so from an office tower 1,700 miles from the factory floor. Second, engineers were replaced, not fired outright, just slowly sidelined. MBA graduates started filling board seats. Finance directors replaced technical directors. The language in the boardroom changed. It stopped being about lift coefficients and structural fatigue. It became about return on net assets, RONA, the acronym that would eventually cost 346 lives. Third, the money changed direction. Between 2013 and 2018, 5 years, Boeing spent $41.5 billion buying back its own stock. $41.5 billion. That's not R&D. That's not safety systems. That's not new designs. That money went to shareholders, to inflate the stock price, to hit the quarterly bonus targets. Meanwhile, Capital expenditure on research and development fell below 2% of sales. For comparison, Airbus was investing nearly twice that rate. And here's where the story gets really dark, because none of this was a secret inside Boeing. The engineers saw it. The safety teams saw it. The quality inspectors saw it, and they said so. But the new culture had a mechanism for handling people who said so. It was called schedule pressure. The unspoken message was clear. Keep your head down. Hit your numbers. Don't create problems. This is the silent shift that no crash investigation can fully capture. You can investigate a missing bolt. You can't easily investigate a culture that made asking about the bolt feel dangerous. The engineers who built Boeing's reputation didn't suddenly become incompetent. They were just no longer in charge. 2011, Airbus launches the A320neo. New engines, incredible fuel efficiency. Airlines love it. American Airlines, one of Boeing's most loyal customers, immediately orders 460 of them. Inside Boeing, this is a 5-alarm emergency. They need a response. Fast. And fast is the key word. Because the right response would take 10 years and $15 billion. A clean sheet design, a new airframe, a new plane. But the new Boeing, the hunter-killer Boeing, didn't have 10 years. They had quarterly earnings calls. So they chose the cheaper answer. Take the 737. The same basic airframe Boeing had been flying since 1968. A plane designed before the moon landing. Strap on bigger, more fuel-efficient engines. Call it new. Call it the 737 MAX. Collect the orders. There was just one problem. Those bigger engines couldn't fit under the old 737 wing. The plane sat too low to the ground. So engineers mounted the engines higher and further forward on the wing, and that changed everything. When you move engines forward and higher on a jetliner, the physics fight back. Under high thrust, the nose of the plane pitches upward, too far upward. In certain flight conditions, this could lead to a stall. An aerodynamic engineer would tell you, the solution to this problem is a redesign, a new airframe, higher landing gear, a clean slate. But a financial engineer would tell you something different. Write some software. And so they did. They called it the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, MCAS. When the plane's nose pitched too high, MCAS would automatically push it back down, a software fix for a physics problem. In theory, not unreasonable. Modern jets are full of computers. But in execution, that's where the deception began. While the world was watching the crash investigations, something else was happening inside Boeing. It had been happening for years, the whistleblowers. John Barnett spent 32 years at Boeing. He was a quality engineer on the 787 Dreamliner program at the South Carolina plant. And in 2016, he started noticing something that kept him up at night. Parts. Defective parts. Parts that should have been scrapped. He watched them disappear from the material review segregation areas, the secure cages where non-conforming parts are supposed to be locked away. And then he'd see them again. On the production line, being installed on aircraft. He tested it, meticulously, the way engineers do. He took 300 emergency oxygen systems on 787 aircraft, and he tested whether they would deploy correctly in the event of a cabin depressurization. 75 failed, 25%. 1 in 4 emergency oxygen systems on aircraft already flying passengers around the world would not work in an emergency. Barnett reported this up the chain. Management told him to stop creating problems. He escalated. The retaliation began. Performance reviews that had been exemplary for 3 decades suddenly became negative. He was moved to less critical roles. His concerns were buried in corporate procedures that went nowhere. He filed a lawsuit, he testified, he gave depositions, he gave a second deposition. On March 9, 2024, the night before his 3rd deposition day, John Barnett was found dead in his truck in a Charleston, South Carolina hotel parking lot. A gunshot wound, ruled a suicide by authorities. His family disputes the circumstances to this day. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Boeing in 2025, alleging that years of corporate harassment and retaliation had broken him. I'm not going to tell you what to believe about John Barnett's death, but I will tell you this. The man who spent his career trying to make planes safer died before he could finish his testimony. And the problems he identified, the missing parts, the defective systems, they were later substantiated by federal investigators. He was right. He was always right. And Boeing made his life hell for it. He wasn't alone. Sam Salehpour. Over 40 years in aerospace engineering. In 2024, he testified before the U.S. Senate about what he'd witnessed on the 787 and 777 production lines. The fuselage sections, massive pieces of composite carbon fiber, were being joined together with gaps that exceeded design specifications, not by a little, across 98.7% of the joints he inspected. The fix Boeing used? Workers were told to force the sections together, physically. Salehpour described workers jumping on misaligned fuselage sections to make them fit. In the industry, this became known as the Tarzan effect. When you force carbon fiber composite sections together, you leave microscopic debris between the layers. You create microfractures. You shorten the fatigue life of the airframe. These aren't planes that are going to fall out of the sky tomorrow, but they are planes that may develop structural issues far earlier in their service life than they were certified for. There are over 1,700 A7s currently flying. Salehpour's reward for testifying? He was threatened. His job was threatened. According to his Senate testimony, he was even threatened physically by a colleague. And then there was Joshua Dean, a quality auditor at Spirit AeroSystems, the supplier that built Boeing's fuselages. He flagged improperly drilled holes in fuselage bulkheads. He was fired. In May 2024, weeks after testifying, he died suddenly from a severe infection. He was 45. 3 whistleblowers. 3 people who tried to stop what was happening from the inside. All 3 silenced before the full story could be told. I'll let you sit with that. January 5th, 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. Portland, Oregon. This aircraft, a brand new Boeing 737 MAX 9, had been delivered just 3 months earlier. It had made precisely 145 previous flights. At 16,000 feet, a section of the fuselage, a mid-exit door plug, separated from the aircraft. In an instant, a hole roughly the size of a refrigerator opened in the side of the plane. The decompression was explosive. Seats, bags, even clothing were pulled toward the opening. A child sitting nearby lost their shirt. A phone was sucked out. There were no fatalities, only because those seats happened to be unoccupied that night. If the flight had been full, if those seats had held 2 or 3 passengers, they would have been ejected into the sky above Oregon. The NTSB investigation took 18 months. Their final report, AR 2504, is one of the most damning documents in modern aviation history. And here's what they found. In September 2023, that door plug had been opened at Boeing's Renton factory. A supplier, Spirit AeroSystems, had damaged some rivets. Boeing workers opened the door to fix them. To open the plug safely, 4 critical bolts had to be removed. These are the bolts that prevent the plug from moving upward and outward. Without those 4 bolts, the door is held in only by door guides, basically tracks. It can move. It can separate. The workers removed the bolts. They fixed the rivets. They reinstalled the door plug. And they did not reinstall the bolts. Here's where the corporate failure becomes almost incomprehensible. Boeing had a process, a business process instruction, that required every step of every removal and reinstallation to be documented, written down, signed off, verified. That process existed specifically to prevent this exact situation, and it was not followed. No documentation was created for the door removal, no work order was opened in the IT system, and because no ticket existed in the system, Boeing's QA inspection process was never triggered. Now we get to the part most people never reach, the hidden architecture of failure. Because everything I've told you so far, the crashes, the bolts, the whistleblowers, that's the story as it appears in newspapers. What I'm going to tell you now is the story underneath the story, the systemic design of a collapse. Hidden truth. 1. Boeing didn't outsource manufacturing. It outsourced its own eyes. In 2005, 8 years after the McDonnell Douglas merger, Boeing made a decision that felt smart at the time. They spun off their Wichita manufacturing base into a separate company. They called it Spirit AeroSystems. The rationale was financial engineering at its finest. If Boeing didn't own the factory's costs didn't appear on Boeing's balance sheet. That improved a financial ratio called return on net assets, RONA. The stock looked better. The quarterly numbers looked better. But here's what actually happened. Boeing didn't just outsource a factory. They outsourced their quality control instincts. In 2024, investigators discovered that untraceable titanium parts had made their way into Boeing's supply chain. Titanium, the material inside the structural skeleton of commercial jets. No traceable origin, no verifiable quality standard. Boeing had lost visibility into its own raw materials. In December 2025, after spending years denying that outsourcing was the problem, Boeing paid $4.7 billion to buy Spirit AeroSystems back. They had created Spirit to improve their financial ratios. They spent $4.7 billion to undo it. Hidden truth. 2. The door bolts were a software failure before they were a human failure. Everyone focuses on the workers who forgot the bolts. But here's the deeper story that the NTSB report reveals. Boeing's factories run on a Material Requirements Planning System, an MRP system. It's the digital heartbeat of the factory. It tracks every aircraft, every part, every work order, every step. The workers who removed the Alaska door plug never opened a ticket. They worked around the system, informally, physically. The MRP system moved the aircraft forward, because to the software, no work order was open. No work order meant no QA check. No QA check meant the bolts were never verified. A multi-billion-dollar company with a trillion-dollar order backlog, brought to crisis by workers physically bypassing a digital ticketing system. Hidden truth. 3. The Defense Division quietly destroyed the commercial future. The KC-46 tanker contract, meant to refuel Air Force jets in flight, has now cost Boeing over $7 billion in losses. The failure point was a camera system used by the boom operator to guide refueling. It was laggy. It distorted under certain lighting conditions. The Air Force deemed it unsafe. And then there was Starliner. In June 2024, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams launched for what was supposed to be an 8-day mission. 5 thrusters failed on approach. Multiple helium leaks developed. The root cause? A Teflon seal that expanded under heat. Wilmore and Williams were stranded on the space station for 286 days. They had to be rescued by a SpaceX Crew Dragon in March 2025. NASA designated the mission a Type A mishap. Their 300-page investigation found what every Boeing investigation finds: chaotic processes, unclear roles, a risk acceptance posture that undermines safety. To build a next-generation narrowbody, a genuine replacement for the aging 737, Boeing needs roughly $15 to $20 billion dedicated purely to R&D. That money has to come from profitable operations, but the Defense Division is bleeding billions instead of generating them. Boeing is not designing the future of aviation. Boeing is barely surviving its past. Here's what all of this looks like in numbers, and the numbers are staggering. In 2024, Boeing's worst year, the company lost $11.8 billion. That's not revenue lost. That's net loss, cash burned, destruction of value. They entered 2026 carrying $54 billion in total debt. Their commercial airplanes division, the core business, was still running at negative 7.5% to negative 8% operating margins in early 2026. A company that should be printing money with a $682 billion backlog, over 6,100 planes ordered, was still losing money on every airplane it built. And then there was the legal dimension. In July 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice concluded that Boeing had violated a 2021 deferred prosecution agreement, the deal that had kept Boeing from being criminally charged over the MAX crashes. Boeing agreed to plead guilty to criminal fraud. A federal judge rejected the initial plea deal. As of early 2026, the families of the 346 victims are in federal appeals court demanding a full criminal trial. The families of people who died because Boeing hid a software system from pilots. Those families are still fighting for accountability. Meanwhile, Airbus. In the old world, Airbus and Boeing competed fiercely, back and forth. Today, Airbus has a backlog of over 8,750 aircraft, nearly 10 years of production. They are functionally sold out. Airlines that want planes, and they desperately want planes because global travel has never been stronger, are waiting until the early 2030s for new Airbus deliveries. Here's the cruel irony. That Airbus backlog is, right now, Boeing's lifeline. Airlines can't get Airbus planes fast enough, so they keep their Boeing orders. Not because they trust Boeing, because they have no choice. Emirates, Singapore Airlines, American, United. They push back their delivery schedules. They hedge their bets. They check tail numbers. Passengers check tail numbers. What plane is this flight? Has become a Google search. When your customers are researching how to avoid your product, that is not a reputation problem. That is an existential one. Boeing didn't fail for one reason. It failed for 6 simultaneous reasons. And understanding this layered collapse is the most important part of this entire story. Layer 1, engineering. The first layer was engineering. MCAS ran on a single sensor, no redundancy, violating a core principle of aviation safety. 787 fuselage joints were being forced together with gaps exceeding specification on 98.7% of inspected units. 777X engine pylons developed thrust-link cracks during structural testing. Every single one of these failures has a root in the same place: design reviews that prioritize cost and schedule over engineering rigor. When the people making final technical calls are financial executives, not engineers, this is what happens. Physics doesn't negotiate. Layer 2, management. The second layer was management. Moving headquarters from Seattle to Chicago wasn't just symbolic, it was structural. When senior leadership is geographically removed from the factory floor, they lose something irreplaceable. They lose the informal knowledge, the floor walk, the direct relationship with the people doing the work. They start managing through dashboards and metrics, and the dashboard showed what management wanted to see, because the pressure to show good numbers flows downward. Traveled work, planes moving down the assembly line with missing parts, became normal. It became so normal that the IT systems were literally designed to accommodate it. Layer 3, incentives. The third layer was incentives. Here's the question that cuts to the bone of this entire story. What were Boeing's executives being paid to do? Not what were they told to do. What were they paid to do? The answer: deliver short-term financial metrics, stock price, quarterly earnings, return on net assets. Those are the metrics that drove executive compensation. Not defect rates, not safety KPIs, not long-term structural integrity. When you pay executives to maximize stock price, they will maximize stock price. $41.5 billion in buybacks between 2013 and 2018 didn't happen by accident. It happened because that was the most efficient path to triggering the performance bonuses. Layer 4, regulation. The fourth layer was regulation. The FAA allowed Boeing to self-certify critical safety systems. This practice, called Organization Designation Authorization, made sense in theory. Boeing's engineers know Boeing's planes better than any outside regulator could. But it only works if those engineers are empowered to make honest safety calls. When a culture of pressure and retaliation exists inside the company, and the regulator is relying on that company's own people to certify safety, you no longer have independent oversight. You have regulatory capture. The FAA, in its own retrospective assessment, admitted it had been too hands-off. It took 346 deaths and a door blowing off a new plane before that authority was revoked. Layer 5, culture. Everything comes back to culture. The old Boeing had a phrase for its safety culture: the Association of Engineers. Any worker could stop the line. Safety conversations were encouraged, rewarded. The new Boeing had a different phrase. An informal one: don't be a problem. Internal surveys revealed that more than half of employees felt schedule pressure was compromising quality. Whistleblowers were transferred, harassed, threatened, fired. One died in his truck before his third deposition. When a culture systematically punishes the people trying to prevent disasters, disasters become inevitable. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Layer 6, time. This is perhaps the most underappreciated dimension of this entire story. This collapse happened over 25 years. Not 25 days, not 25 months. 25 years of slow, compounding degradation. The engineers who built Boeing's reputation aged out of the company. The institutional knowledge, the informal wisdom of how to build safe planes, walked out the door with them, replaced by a post-COVID workforce of younger, less experienced workers operating in a culture that punished questions. The 2024 door plug incident happened partly because a second-shift team, likely relatively inexperienced, reinstalled the door without its critical bolts, and no one checked their work, because the system that should have triggered the check was bypassed by people who had learned, from the culture around them, that keeping the plane moving mattered more than stopping to verify. 25 years to build that culture. The consequences arrived on Flight 1282. Now let's talk about what this means, not just for Boeing, for every organization, every leader, every investor. Because the Boeing story is not unique, the pattern is everywhere. Lesson 1, culture is the product. Every plane Boeing builds is a physical manifestation of its internal culture. If the culture values precision, redundancy, and speaking up, planes are safe. If the culture values speed, cost-cutting, and silence, planes have missing bolts. There is no separation between what a company is and what it builds. This is true in aerospace. It's true in pharmaceuticals. It's true in software. It's true in finance. When you compromise the culture, you compromise the product. You just don't always see it immediately. Sometimes it takes 145 flights before the door falls off. Lesson 2. Financial engineering is the enemy of real engineering. $41.5 billion in stock buybacks. $15+ billion in defense contract losses. Every dollar that went to inflating the stock price was a dollar that didn't go to designing the next airplane. Every incentive that rewarded quarterly metrics over multi-year safety investments was an incentive pointed in the wrong direction. For investors, when you see a company with a dominant market position aggressively buying back its own stock instead of investing in R&D, ask why. Are they generating so much cash they literally can't find productive investments? Or are executives optimizing for their own bonus structures? The answer matters. Boeing was the second option. Lesson 3. Outsourcing without oversight is surrender. Boeing outsourced its fuselage manufacturing to cut costs. They outsourced their regulatory authority to save time on certifications. They outsourced their quality inspections through verification optimization. Each time they told themselves, we're still in control, we're just more efficient. Each time, they quietly lost visibility into what was actually happening, until a factory they technically owned was producing planes with missing bolts and nobody knew. The lesson: you can outsource a task. You cannot outsource accountability. The moment you stop seeing the work being done, you stop knowing if it's being done right. Lesson 4. Whistleblowers are the immune system. These were not disgruntled employees. These were experienced professionals who had spent decades in the industry. In a healthy organization, their warnings are received, investigated, and acted upon. In Boeing's organization, they were treated as threats to the production schedule. For any leader watching this, the person on your team who is raising uncomfortable concerns is not the problem. The problem is the issue they're raising. Silence them, and you silence your own early warning system. You don't eliminate the risk. You just eliminate your ability to see it coming. Lesson 5. Trust, once destroyed, takes longer to rebuild than it did to build. Boeing took 80 years to become synonymous with safe air travel. It took about 10 years to hollow out the culture, and it will likely take another 10 years, minimum, to genuinely rebuild it. Maybe longer. Because trust is not rebuilt in press releases. It's not rebuilt in Senate testimony. It's rebuilt plane by plane, delivery by delivery, defect-free month by defect-free month. The new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, an aerospace engineer, an outsider, a person who actually understands the product, represents the right instinct. The decade of disciplined strategy, no new programs, focus on fixing the factories, rebuild vertical integration, is the right strategy. But strategy is not culture. The test isn't the announcement. The test is whether the next engineer who spots a missing bolt feels safe raising their hand. We return to where we started. A plane in flight, high altitude, silent. Then, the quiet sound of an engine. Steady, reliable, the way it should be. Here's the thing about Boeing that keeps me up at night. It's not the crashes. It's not the missing bolts. It's not even the whistleblowers. It's the fact that none of this was inevitable. At every point in this story, there was a moment where someone could have made a different decision. Someone could have said, we need to redesign the airframe, not patch it with software. Someone could have said, this single sensor system is not acceptable. Someone could have said, moving headquarters away from the factories is a mistake. Someone could have said, John Barnett is right, and we need to stop the line. Those moments existed. The decisions were made consciously, by intelligent, educated people who were responding rationally to the incentives they had been given. That's the real lesson of Boeing. It's not that bad people did bad things. It's that a system was built, slowly, deliberately, invisibly, that made good people make bad decisions. A system that rewarded the wrong outcomes. A system that punished the people trying to protect the right ones. And when you build that system, when you design incentives that point toward the cliff, you should not be surprised when the car goes over. Boeing is still here. Hundreds of thousands of people still work there. Brilliant engineers, skilled mechanics, people who care. The planes are still flying. The regulators are watching more closely than they have in decades. The new leadership has made the right promises. But here's what I know about institutions. They don't recover from culture collapse with a press release. They don't recover with a Senate apology. They recover when the next engineer who finds a flaw in a factory, in a design, in a process, raises their hand, and nothing happens to them. When that becomes the story Boeing tells for years in a row, that's when trust begins to return. Boeing's collapse was never really about planes. It was about what happens when the people who build things are no longer the people who run things, when the metric becomes more important than the mission, when the bonus cycle shortens and the engineering cycles stay long, when the people who knew best were made to feel like the problem. This didn't just happen at Boeing. This has happened, and is happening, at companies across every industry. The pressure is everywhere. The incentives are often the same. The only thing that changes is the product. And for Boeing, the product is a metal tube, traveling at 35,000 feet, with 200 people inside. There is no margin for error up there. And somewhere, 25 years ago, a room full of executives decided there was. This wasn't just the failure of a company. This was the failure of a system. And until we change the system, we'll keep asking the same question. What plane is this flight?